Everybody, thanks so much for coming out on a Wednesday night, or is it still day? I don't know. But yeah, it's beautiful out. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Erik Molano. I'm Town Hall's Inside Out Neighborhood Resident for Capitol Hill and the Central District. And on behalf of Town Hall, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's celebration and conversation about the history of the Central District. So this event is part of our Civic series. Our Inside Out season is supported by the Wyncote Foundation Northwest, Kafin Foundation, and the True Brown Foundation. Our Civic series is supported by Boeing, Real Networks Foundation, and KUOW. Our residency program, like the one that I'm a part of, is supported by the Cloud Room and the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods. So they're the ones who make this free for everybody here. Woo! Hopefully someone's here. So our evening starts with storytelling by Annie Gallarosa, followed by Linda Elmen, Elmer Dixon, and Wyking Garrett. After that, we'll convene these storytellers in a panel discussion with Marie Kide. Then they'll take your questions. So while we have some of our presentations, if you have any questions, just think about them. You can ask them during the Q&A. So if you have a question, please use the mics on either side. There's one over here and one over there. And keep your questions concise, please, so we can get to as many people as possible. After the Q&A, we'll have musical performances by CarLarans and Draze. So it's a jam-packed night, so we're going to be moving along. Before I turn things over, I should acknowledge that we are not, in fact, at Town Hall. Our historic First Hill home is closed for a major renovation, and we've surpassed $22.5 million raised for the project thanks to the over 1,000 supporters from across our community. So this month, Town Hall is partnering with the Nelson Family Foundation to help us raise $200,000 to underwrite our new acoustic system. We're 80% of our way to the goal, and we've reached the last 48 hours for you to give and have your donations matched dollar for dollar. So that's the last 48 hours now. To support Great Sound for All, pick up a donation card at the membership table up at the front and dip your card in one of the blue dip jars or visit townhallseattle.org/hearitall. So we'll reopen in early 2019, but while our building is closed, we're producing a season of events at venues all over Seattle, North and South. I'd also like to thank Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute for hosting us tonight. Our upcoming programs include Khalid Beydoun on understanding the roots of Islamophobia, Karen Fredrickson Goldson celebrating our LGBTQ elders, and Sean Scott looking back at Forward Thrust. And we have dozens more programs on the calendar, so keep an eye out for upcoming events in your neighborhood and all around town on our website, townhallseattle.org. Or you can pick up a calendar up at the front table. So finally, I'd like to thank the members of our audience tonight. Members are the reason we're able to offer most programs for just $5. If you support broad community access to ideas and creativity, please visit the membership table in the lobby and consider becoming a member. So it was a pretty big task being a representative for both Capitol Hill and the Central District. And yeah, as somebody who's been in Seattle only 5 years and am not from the Central District, I knew I couldn't tell the story of this neighborhood. So my mission was to find community members who really could. And so tonight is not necessarily a chronological history lesson, but an exploration of personal stories across communities and across generations. So I am a second-generation American. My mom is from El Salvador, and my father is from Colombia. They both moved to LA when they were young. And as their son, it's strange because when it comes to my heritage, I'm in this really sort of strange gray area because I feel like my body and my bloodline are Latino, but I feel like my mind is white. And since I grew up in Los Angeles, the culture of my parents and grandparents has been mostly lost. When I was young, my mom and dad went back and forth about whether my sisters and I should be bilingual. My mom wanted us to speak Spanish, and my dad wanted us to focus only on English. so we'd be better at it. My dad ultimately decided, and turns out he was misinformed, being bilingual is better for the brain and has been shown to improve intelligence. So now, holding on to a language that I've nearly lost, it's up to me to actively preserve it, to dig into my own history and rediscover where I came from. Because in my family, my sisters and I are the last link to keeping our culture alive. So tonight we'll listen to previous and current generations who have also lived that change and are holding on to their culture. In regard to land use, when you replace mom and pop, local community institutions, and replace them with Walmart, Starbucks, unaffordable cookie-cutter architecture, a neighborhood loses its soul. A culture loses its home. And our speakers and performers are working to preserve that soul. They're actively preserving heritage and empowering community right here in the Central District, for the past, for the present, and for the future. So I'm honored to introduce our first speaker. She is an educator and grandmother who has lived in the Central District all her life. For decades, she has been an esteemed educator in intercultural communications, student counseling, and crisis intervention, as well as a crucial member of the Asian Student Coalition at Seattle Central College in the 70s. Please welcome Annie Galarosa.
It's an honor to be here, to be able to talk about my perspective on the central area, the CD, as we call it. And thank you for the nice introduction, Eric. And again, in the interest of time, I may just end up reading so that I don't ramble. So, in 1955, my father returned to the Philippines to bring his family to the United States. He had been working since 1950 for Northwest Orient Airlines and was stationed in Alaska for a while, Chicago, and then Seattle. I didn't know my father the first 4 years of my life. When he came back to get us, I was about 4.5, and that was in 1955. So he bought a house across the street from one of the oldest Catholic churches in the city. The second house from is that the right? That was our family home. It's not there anymore. It's been replaced with a new structure. But in the 50s, when we moved there, I think my father chose that neighborhood because many of his acquaintances were Filipinos, and there were many Filipinos that lived in the area at the time, and also the fact that it was in close proximity to Chinatown. In the 1950s, though, the CD was very multicultural. I remember going to school with kids whose family names were like Mistuff, Lidsparsky, Tobin, Farrell, Arena, whose origins were from Poland, France, Germany, Ireland, and Italy, most likely immigrants like my family, but from post-World War II Europe. Other names whose origins were from the other part of the world, like Villaflor, Cordova, Ligo, Castellano, Enrique, Carrillo, Salvador, Ramos, many of them non-English speaking at first, just like my family. Then there were names like Takeuchi, Matsudaira, Sugiyama, Beltran, Floor, Mitchell, Walls, Jones, Melanson, Carter, and Ellis. These were families who were probably past the first generation and probably way beyond into the second, third, or fourth generation. Some of the children that I remember playing with were mixed race. We referred to them as mestizo, which means half, and some were either black and white. Others were Indo-Pino, which is what we referred to for Native Americans who were half Native and half Filipino, Afro-Filipinos, and Latino Filipinos, to mention a few. There were Jewish people there, but I didn't know who they were at the time. I was aware of who they were by the many temples in the area, and I remember playing on the site where the Temple de Hirsch was being built, and I think it's on 15th and Union. I thought it was a pretty exotic building. This is a picture of my father, Private First Class E.G. Galarosa. He served with the U.S. Army Division of the Philippine Scouts in World War II. Company A, 14th Engineering Division. He was captured as a POW. He escaped and survived the infamous Bataan Death March and joined the guerrillas until liberation of the Philippines. He was honorably discharged in 1946. And from there, in 1950, that's when, as I said earlier, he migrated to the United States as an employee of Northwest Orient Airlines. And he brought us in 1955 to Seattle. And that was the reason why he was able to bring his large family. There were 5 of us at the time, because he worked for the airlines. And you all know what the perks are with the airlines. Mr. Gallarosa, or Scotty, as his name was anglicized from Escolastico, bought the house in 1956. As you can see, it is one of the oldest churches. It was built, I think they started constructing in 1998 and was completed in 1901. And the house that we bought was kind of started around the same time. My dad still lives there 62 years later. He still resides on the same property, but in a newer structure, which was built just last year. The backyard we played in is all gone and is replaced with 2 3-story single-family homes similar to my dad's. Yeah, we became part of the gentrification, unfortunately, but that was due to being able to afford to be able to remain living in the CD. This type of architecture is typical of the increasing homes being built throughout the neighborhood due to gentrification. This is a picture of myself. I'm the youngest at the end, look like stair steps, en route from the Philippines to Seattle. Many post-World War II families from Asia and Europe that I mentioned earlier immigrated to the United States after the war, so in the 50s and 60s, particularly Filipino veterans and their families who were promised U.S. citizenship by General Douglas MacArthur for their service in the U.S. Army and Philippine Scouts. So the Gallarosa family arrived in a DC-7 propeller plane. Some of you may not be old enough to remember what those are, but we came in the era before jet planes. So needless to say, the trip took 2 weeks due to a layover in Japan and fuel stops in Guam, Japan, and Alaska before arrival to SeaTac Airport. Now, one of the first rules my father expected from us kids was to speak English only. I think he wanted to make sure that we became Americanized as quickly as possible, and also to ensure that my mother could pick up English from us. There were no ESL classes back then. So my poor mom learned English, bad words and all, from my older brother. But in hindsight, this rule handicapped my siblings and I from being completely bilingual in our native language, of which there were 2 of them. And a lot of people don't realize that in the Philippines, there's at least over 76 languages. So consequently, we can understand the language, but the response is always in English. So I guess we could say we're semi-bilingual. So this is the first family photo taken here, and the youngest was born not too far from here at Providence Hospital, which most of you may know as Swedish Providence, about 3 or 4 blocks north of here. And 2 years later, my younger sister was born, so she's not pictured in this picture just yet. And they were both born at the same hospital. As you can see, this is my first communion picture in front of the church steps. And the other slide is my mom. And you can see the white picket fence, which no longer exists. And just to give you a view of how close we were to the church. As I said, in the 50s, many neighborhood families were born from different ethnicities and cultures, and the central area became predominantly black during the 60s and during the height of the civil rights movement. But the neighborhood, as I remember, it was always filled with children. It was common for families back then to be very large. On our block alone, like I said, my family, we were 7 kids. Our neighbor behind us had 7, and the house across from them had 13. And that's just to mention a few. And every house had large families. It was easy back in the day to form a baseball or a football team, and almost 2 leagues. And when we played in the streets or the playground of the Immaculate School. Now, the Immaculate School is a private Catholic school run by Sisters of the Holy Names and the Jesuit priests who resided in the rectory next door. The first floor was grades 1 through 8 for boys and girls, and then the second floor was an all-girls high school. I attended there for the 12 years of my life. Imagine wearing a uniform 12 years of your life. But after 8th grade, most of the boys were sent to O'Day High School, which is located on First Hill. But my brothers ended up in Garfield, primarily because affordability. I mean, who can afford to send 7 kids to private school? And the other reason really is because they came when they were older and their English was still pretty limited. And so they had a hard time passing the entrance exams to O'Day. So moving on, during the late 70s and 80s, many of the families had moved away towards the Rainier Valley and Beacon Hill area. By the new millennium, I noticed that gentrification had already started and to push more and more low-income folks from the central area, the CD, mostly people of color, pushed even further south into the Renton and Kent Valley for more affordable housing. But growing up as an immigrant kid, you were neither black nor white, at least I wasn't, and had limited English or an accent was not without its disadvantages or perils. I think most immigrant families would have similar or parallel stories of experiencing bullying, harassment, and missed opportunities due to our ignorance of available resources or lack thereof. On top of that, the racist-based educational systems policy and procedures and the metered neglect by the social service agencies back then and other government agencies. My siblings and I had more than our share of being involved in fights, being bullied, and mistreatment by some neighborhood kids, but even teachers. Those were the early years. So growing up in the city back then made you tough, a bit more streetwise, wary of others and the government, and I'm pretty sure those experiences and influence helped shape the person I am today. This is a picture of my sister's 1967 red Mustang, which I think for some of you car buffs is considered a classic. I got to inherit it. Inside is my younger brother, and next to the car is my second older brother who joined the Air Force, and the priest who lived across the street. His name was Father J. Shanahan. Now, there were some advantages and disadvantages to being in close proximity to priests across the street. Father Shanahan, Father McIntyre certainly had a hand in watching over us sometimes too closely, but pretty much kept us from getting into too much trouble, meaning that at least my older brothers could have joined gangs, because there were some gangs back in the day, but thankfully managed not to go that route. Now, as during middle school, I was always the rebellious one. I did start my own girl gang, but it wasn't anything notorious like that. We were called the Amazons. And we had battles with the neighborhood boys. I managed pretty well because I taught my gang how to use slingshots. So, okay, this is just a different view from the church steps, so you can see the house behind that tree, the house that we grew up in. Typical with the white picket fence that looked like the American dream, right? During the 60s, some of the families started moving south to Beacon Hill, as I mentioned earlier, or the Rainier Valley. I can't say for sure if redlining by this local Seafirst Bank or any other bank in the CD was a factor, but I'm pretty sure it was one reason my dad stayed put. At any rate, more Black Americans were moving into the CD, and by 1970s, it did become predominantly a Black community. During that time, of course, the growing wave of the civil rights movement was rapidly propelled by the passing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. You could say that the CD was just a mild microcosm version of the rest of the country experiencing protests, marches, and sit-ins spearheaded by the great Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. on the national level and other Black leaders like Malcolm X, and organizations such as the NAACP and the Black Panthers. And we had our own local version, whom you will hear from later. The unrest eventually became riots due to frustration and government stalling. So to most folks, the CD may have become known as, quote, a dangerous neighborhood during those times. But for me, I just remember when white people would get lost and end up in the CD, often looking for an address north of Madison. Madison is what I considered the north boundary of the CD. And they would have fear in their eyes. They would spot my friends and I playing in the street and with a look of relief ask for directions. I always thought it was funny. I was neither black or white, so I guess my brown color represented a safe person to approach. Little did they realize that I was already harboring suspicion and dislike about most people due to my own negative experiences of being called the N-word by a white person and chinked by both white and black persons, because at that time nobody knew who or what a Filipino was. Ironically, my very best friend of 64 years was white, but in my mind she wasn't, because she basically grew up Filipino, like any other sister in my family, and she was one of the few white kids left in the neighborhood. So this is just an example of what it's like to grow up as an immigrant. You get to see a lot of perspective from a lot of people's eyes, as well as experiencing, always being reminded that you're an other or that you're forever foreign, even if you are a naturalized US citizen. Some of you may be familiar with this picture, the FYA drill team, which stands for the Filipino Youth Activities. In 1959, Fred Cordova started the first and only Filipino-American drill team in the United States. From the 50s through the 80s, you could often hear their weekly practice sessions at the Immaculate Playground, a percussive rhythmic marching sound combination of drums, bells, and bamboo sticks, comprised of Mandayan marchers, Princesa drill team, and the Kumbanchero percussioners. Their complex drill choreography, catchy marching tunes representing a fusion of Southern Philippine Muslim, Northern Philippine Igorot, and Afro-Cuban music has won numerous awards to entertain and delight their audience in many parades, especially Seattle Seafair Torchlight. The modern drill team is now into its fourth generation and co-chaired by Ron and Lynette Consego, who are first-generation Kumbancheros and princesses with the help of many family volunteers. The FYA continues to entertain not just in street parades, but at many festivals and events. This organization is truly multicultural and proudly presents the culture, music, and the diverse community of Filipino Americans. In the 70s and 80s, many of the Asian student activists, including myself, were inspired by the Black Power movement. We became involved and allied with other protest movements seeking equity and social justice for farm workers, lettuce and boycott, grape boycott, the construction workers union labor movement headed by Tyree Scott and others from the Black community, Alaska cannery workers located in Chinatown, the protest of the Kingdom, and other encroachments by big business on homes or land primarily in low-income ethnic neighborhoods. Some of our demands included and eventually successfully concluded with establishing community centers for the Native, Latino, and Asian communities, like Daybreak Star, El Centro de la Raza, and the Asian Counseling and Referral Service, just to name a few. Needless to say, though, those projects spanned over 20 years plus in the making. But beyond the student protests against the Vietnam War and the encroachment of gentrification to neighborhoods like the CD and Chinatown International District, the desire for more representation of Asians in higher education, for more Asian professors and administrators, was a key issue. A respected figure and leader in the Asian community who founded the ASC was the late Al Sugiyama. He was a graduate of Garfield High School. Him and his brother and other graduates of Japanese ancestry have been and remain active in the Asian American community. Some of this may look familiar to you as well. Executive Order 9066. This version was issued in King County in 1942, but it wasn't until I was in college that I found out about the Executive Order 9066 issued by President Franklin Roosevelt on February 19, 1942. And I found out that my friends, parents and grandparents, the Nisei and Issei generation, were incarcerated in desert location prison camps like Minidoka and Tule Lake. The part of the central district known as Japan or J-Town was in the south part of the CD, along Yesler Way and Jackson Street, adjacent to and along the northern part of Chinatown. As I said, some of my friends' parents and grandparents were taken away. This racial injustice separated families and friends and robbed them of their property and businesses. This injustice was just one of many reasons that motivated many of us into activism in an attempt to right past wrongs and prevent this type of history from happening again. This was another example of one of our street protests. It was against the building of the Kingdom, which was encroaching upon the Chinatown International District. It would soon overwhelm that neighborhood and threaten to displace many of the elders that lived there. For some of us who grew up knowing about racist policies of the banking and real estate institutions, with their history of redlining the CD and secret covenants on Beacon Hill that forbade the selling of homes to anyone who wasn't white, the anger and outrage doesn't even begin to address the encroachment and displacement of Asian elders in the neighborhood. So the night of the protest, the activists held a community meeting at St. Peter Cleaver Center on 17th and Jefferson, which is now Swedish Providence Hospital. Decided to follow up on their protests. In less than 2 weeks, hundreds would march on the Seattle office of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, to demand funds to preserve the neighborhood. Amid all that protest, you see here pictures of 4 of the most beloved and active leaders in the Black, Native American, Latino, and Asian communities. These guys were known as the Four Amigos and are well known also by the federal, state, county, and city political spheres for their leadership and relentless persistence in demanding for making change. Bernie Whitebear, Larry Gossett, Roberto Maestas, and Uncle Bob Santos were all former residents of the CD, as well as inspirations and mentors to myself and many other fellow activists. Bernie, Roberto, and Uncle Bob have all passed away, but they have deeply impacted the politic and landscape of Seattle and King County. Actually, the Four Amigos were often considered serious thorns on the side of city politicians, county and federal politicians, but they were often able to build bridges and using humor like this, as well as persuasive facts and arguments to make things happen that benefited the underrepresented communities of color, as well as the greater community of Seattle. We were doing a parody being Gladys Knight, and they were my 4 pips. And the music was Heard It Through the Grapevine, because as you know, there's always a lot of rumor and stuff going on in politics. They all have received numerous awards and recognition locally and nationally for their bridge building and effective strategies in advocating for the poor and underrepresented communities of color. This is Dorothy Cordova, another beloved leader in the Filipino community. She represents and is the executive director of FANS, or Filipino American Historical Society, and it's located in my former school, Immaculate School building, which is no longer a school. And she has her office there on 18th Avenue between Marion and Columbia. There are many chapters now of FANS throughout the country, and we have the Seattle chapter and the main chapter here. It was founded by the late Fred Cordova, along with his wife Dorothy. Its precursor was the demonstration project for Asian Americans, which was formerly located at the St. Peter Cleaver Hall on 17th and Jefferson, again, which is now Swedish Providence. Dorothy continues to serve as the executive director and resides on Capitol Hill area in Seattle. She is the author of Filipinos in Puget Sound, 2009. This is a slide of the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project mission to raise awareness through academic research and public education and obtain natural recognition for Filipino-American World War II soldiers for their wartime service to the United States. The FilVet rep people worked with Congress, spearheaded by senators and representatives from Hawaii and California. They led the national effort for passage of Senate Bill 1555 on November 30th, 2016. It's called the Filipino Veterans of World War II Congressional Gold Medal Act of 2015. Subsequently, and thankfully, on December 14, 2016, it was signed into law by our former President Obama. And given the current administration, this effort was daunting, and it took 2 years of relentless lobbying and fundraising to make it happen, thanks to General Taguba and the PhilVet rep. Washington state senators and representatives made Washington state the first to vote unanimously for its passage. This is a picture of my dad and myself. He received his gold medal. He's 101 years old. The official award ceremony took place in Washington, D.C. at the Congressional Senate floor in October 2017. And then later, the local ceremony was just last May at the Renton Pavilion. This project was the work of many of us who raised money and lobbied to make this happen. My father is one of 14 living Filipino veterans in the Pacific Northwest to receive this medal. He was second to the oldest. The oldest is Mr. Tayton, who is 102 years old, and his family also lived in the CD. The surviving families of the deceased veterans received their medal, and there were over 200 awarded in the state of Washington. Thank you. This is the Galarosa clan now. It's not just a family. As you can see, 4 generations, 7 children, 13 grandchildren, 15 great-grandchildren, 5 great-great-grandchildren. We're still here. We're still together. And finally, I chose just 2 of many organizations that one can get involved in. These organizations, like many, can always use volunteers and donations. There are other grassroots organizations within the CD and adjacent international district that focus on issues such as gentrification, homelessness, and the dwindling resources for the low income that can use more volunteers and more help. Understanding the history of people in the neighborhood is key to examining and addressing the issue of runaway gentrification, which unfairly targets low income and many people of color, creating issues of homelessness and newly segregated neighborhoods of mostly white and high income homeowners. So besides the growing economic discrepancies, incidences of microaggression, racial profiling, and other race-based bullying and harassment by individuals and institutions are at an increase. Unfortunately, there are still many people who cannot wrap their mind around the notion of white privilege, which is behind these types of behavior and attitude, whether knowingly or not. So action through volunteerism, neighborhood dialogue, and engagement in local policy making and voting is the key to problem solving and finding resolution to these issues. Take a workshop, join an organization, get training, volunteer your time. I invite you to do this. And thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Thank you so much, Annie. So grateful to have you here. So our next speaker grew up in the Central area in an Orthodox Jewish home. Having retired from a career as a public school research and evaluation guru, she now teaches Hebrew school for Temple de Hirsch Sinai and gives school tours of Pike Place Market and gives tours of historical Jewish Seattle for the Washington State Jewish Historical Society. Please welcome Linda Elmen.
My story is very different from Annie's. I grew up Central area, but I grew up in a small village within the Central area. It's very strange for me to be in this building because I spent a lot of my childhood in this building. This was my synagogue. This was Ashkenazic Bikur Cholam, an East European Orthodox synagogue. This room sat 1,500 people. My father sat somewhere right over here, my mother up there. You didn't pay dues in the synagogue, you bought your seat. So my parents each had a seat. As children, we didn't. The men sat in pews, so it was a little easy to squeeze more men in. The women who were separated sat in seats, these kinds of theater seats. And so my sister and I would have to scramble for seating. On a normally Saturday, it was no problem. There was plenty of room. But on the high holidays, we would be on the stairs. We would be in the back wandering. But it's strange for me to be here because I can't see the space as it was with the seats going up. Can't figure out the arch and so on. So here we are at my synagogue. It was... This is a contemporary picture. The stairs actually went all the way down in those days. Congregation Bikur Cholim was founded in 1891 as Chevra Bikur Cholim, which means it was an organization designed to visit the sick and also provide burial grounds. This building was actually opened in 1915. The architect who designed it was a man by the name of B. Marcus Pratika. He ultimately designed a lot of the Pantages theaters all over the country. In Seattle, he was responsible for designing this building, for designing the Seattle Hebrew Day School, which was on 25th and Cherry, which I'll share with you in a few minutes, and also the current sanctuary at Temple de Hirsch Sinai. He was also involved with a lot of other synagogues. He was a Scotsman who immigrated to the United States around the time of the Alaska-Yukon exposition and stayed here and became a very famous architect. The Jewish community was centered in this area, partly because observant Jews or Orthodox Jews don't drive cars or use any form of transportation on the Sabbath, so they had to live within walking distance of the synagogue. Next slide. This is the inside of the synagogue. So if you look at it, you look around this room, you can see why I'm having a difficult time visualizing myself in the space. This is interesting. It was just a picture of the Ark, which now sits in the synagogue in Seward Park. It was moved in. They moved it completely to Seward Park. I especially like this picture. I found these pictures on the University of Washington has a collection of the Washington Jewish Archives. And this picture I found in the archives. The little guy to the right of the man in white, who was Kurt Steinbrecher, who was the choir director for many years, is my younger brother, Steve. And right behind him, slightly to the left, is my older brother, Hershey. So I guess I just want to continue to plant my roots here. This is where at least the three of the four of us grew up. Steve ended up graduating from some high school on the other side of the other side of the lake, but that's another story. As Annie mentioned, the synagogues were all within about a square mile of each other on this area, I guess, of First Hill to Lower Capitol Hill. Temple de Hirsch was the one that was farthest away. There were, of these congregations, three were Orthodox. There was our Bikur Cholim, there was Sephardic Bikur Cholim, which represented the Mediterranean Jews. There was also Congregation Ezra B'Sorot, which was a different group of Sephardim who came from a different area. And finally, Herzl, which had become a conservative congregation, not as restrictive. People drove to Herzl. And then Temple de Hirsch, which was a Reform congregation from its founding, not quite as old as Bikur Cholim, but in the area for a long time. And it was reformed, so the congregation did not need to live within walking distance. But those of our Orthodox did. We talked about Providence, that's where I was born, and from there we moved. My family was living on 28th. In 1948, as part of the post-World War II, beginning of the boom, my parents moved further east. And the community, in fact, to some degree moved east. People lived further apart, I suppose, in this period. I didn't mention my father grew up on 17th and Fur, so he was obviously easy walking distance from the synagogue his entire life. This is the house on 35th that I grew up in. This is a contemporary picture off of Google. The trees are a little different than they were in my day, but it's my house. This is, I call this my roots and my roots because basically what I'm going to do is track my route from the house that I grew up in on 35th and Cherry to the synagogue, because that's a walk that I took almost every Saturday of my life until I left in 1965 to go away to college. I was the family deviant, the only one to leave, but I did. So we would start out on 35th. I lived closer to Columbia. We'd walk out to Cherry. We'd turn right on Cherry, and we'd start walking along the way. We would become what they now call a walking school bus. Since we refer to our synagogues as shul, I refer to it as a walking shul bus. And we would pass the area of the Madrone Theater. The Madrone Theater was a gathering place. I never got to go there because I was too young to go alone. My older brother and sister got to go. But what was important to me were some of the stores that were just past the Madrone Theater, which would have been, there were 2 kosher butcher shops there. Jews only eat meat slaughtered in a certain way. And so the only meat that we would buy then would be from these kosher butcher shops. They no longer exist in Seattle. All meat is packaged. It comes from places far away. Nothing is local anymore. We continued our walk, and when we got to what's now Martin Luther King Way and Cherry, we got to Brenner's Bakery, which is now an Ethiopian store and restaurant. Brenner's Bakery supplied us with kosher bread and other deli goods, primarily in the Ashkenazic tradition. Interesting, they didn't have a lot of Sephardic food or Mediterranean food, but they did supply kosher bread. The Langendorf Bakery was right behind the synagogue, and on Yom Kippur in particular, our 24-hour fast, it helped keep your saliva functioning to smell that bread. And I always wanted to eat gooey white bread, but it wasn't kosher, so we didn't eat it. A few blocks further, we would pass the Seattle Hebrew Day School, and this is the picture of its opening in 1930. It was originally the Seattle Talmud Torah. It was in 1948, it became the day school. And there I am in 2nd grade. We continued from there past to Garfield. We turned left on 23rd, we'd walk past Garfield, and for me, Garfield was a wonderful, integrated experience. I went from my very insular Jewish community to a school where I was a minority student, not only as a Jew, but when I went to Garfield, I was a minority student as a white student. We were approximately 60% black, 40% white and Asian, and we never did figure out the white and Asian separation. From there, past Garfield, we would pass the Yesler Library, one of those really important places in my life. It served as a center for Americanization for my parents' generation. Both of my parents were first generation born in Seattle. And so it was an important place for them. And for me, it was just that wonderful place where I got to go and get all those books, which I could read. And then we get to Bicker Column, and this is a picture of what it looked like when the stairs went all the way down to 17th. Other parts of my community that were important to me included Lake Washington. I learned to swim at Madrone Beach. And on Sabbath afternoons, since we would go for long walks. My friends would come pick me up. Many of my friends, even as I got into high school, still lived in the central area. But in the late 1950s, as Annie mentioned, the neighborhood changed and the Jewish community started moving to Seward Park. My father resisted the move until 1967, and then he moved shortly to Seward Park and ended up in Bellevue. The Jewish community sold this building to the city of Seattle, and by 1972, services were no longer held here. So the community moved, the synagogue moved, the Orthodox community was no longer in the central area. Again, a picture of the synagogues as they were in 1950, all within a mile of each other, is a picture of where the synagogues are today. There's only one synagogue left in the central area, and that would be Temple de Hirsch Sinai. To me, growing up, this was foreign territory. I had about as much in common it seemed, with people who went to Temple de Hirsch as I had with St. Teresa's Church, which was just down the street from me. It was foreign territory, and I was rarely, if ever, there. That's changed. I changed my worldview, I guess, and am now currently very active at Temple de Hirsch Sinai. I teach bar mitzvah students on Thursday afternoons, and on Tuesday I just finished teaching 3rd grade Hebrew. I teach beginner Hebrew. I suppose it's really, what it comes down to is maintaining my Jewish heritage is really important. To some degree, telling the story of the central area Jewish community is important to me too. And so I've given several tours of the Seattle Jewish community which focus on what the central area, and then we go to Seward Park just because that's where my community moved. But Seattle's Orthodox community is now in Seward Park, Mercer Island, the North End, East Side, you name it. We have definitely scattered. So our involvement in the central area really focuses to a large degree on two groups. One would be Temple Deher Sinai, and the other would be the Jewish Family Services, which provides service to a lot of members of the community beyond. It's not just, does not just serve the Jewish community anymore. So the interior of Temple Deher Sinai, which is an amazingly beautiful building for a very stark 1960s construction, also with the services of B. Marcus Pratika. Interesting. Just a couple of agencies groups that I'm involved with. I'm involved with the Washington State Jewish Historical Society, trying to retain our history so that our involvement in Seattle or the central area doesn't get lost. There's a lot more to it than what I've shared. And finally, Temple Deher Sinai, which continues to stand as a community partner in the in the Seattle area. And I'm very proud to say that our rabbis have taken great leadership in working with all members of the community to create a healthy, functioning central area.
Thank you so much, Linda. It is my great honor to introduce our next speaker. He is an activist and co-founder of the Seattle Black Panther Party in 1968, where he helped organize police alert patrols to monitor and halt police abuse, along with the Children's Free Breakfast Program, free medical clinics, and food programs. He is currently the president of Executive Diversity Services and has been a leader in the field of diversity and inclusion, multiculturalism, and human rights for over 30 years. Please welcome Elmer Dixon.
Good evening. Yeah. All power to the people. See, I don't know what that means, do you? Because I didn't hear it vibrant enough. See, when people have power, things change. People tend to forget that it is they that hold the power, and that's why we are in the condition in which we are today. Now, I just want to talk briefly about where I and then us as a people came from and where we have to go today. I'll give a little bit of background on the Black Panther Party. Our family came from Chicago. We moved here in 1957, and our first foray into the CD began right down on Hiawatha Place, right behind Rainier Avenue, a couple of blocks from Goodwill. We lived there for a year or so, moved up to 24th, and we landed in the Madrone District in 1960, right across the street from Madrone Park, where my mother still lives today at 93 years old. I just want to mention growing up across the street from Madrone Park, Madrone Playfield at the time, because unlike Chicago on the south side, there was about every population that you could think of. Annie talked about the diversity. I won't go into that broad diversity. It was all there on that playground. And I went to the schools in the area, first Coleman, then Madrone, Meany, and then Garfield. And so I grew up in that same multicultural environment. A lot of people don't understand that black people in the CD had this wealth of multicultural experiences. While I could eat my first matzah ball with my Jewish friends, could eat a German dish with friends that were from, parents were from Germany, others from Russia, others from Japan. The Karosi family was like part of the whole community. So it was a very multicultural environment that we grew up in. I'll talk about the truth about the Black Panther Party. Go to the next slide, please. We grew up in a household where our parents made sure that we were aware of what was going on around us. My father fought in World War II. In fact, he fought in the South Pacific. As a young recruit, actually joining the Fighting 54th, which was the regiment that was featured in the movie Glory. It was the first all-black infantry group that had roots all the way back to the Civil War. When he was stationed in Mississippi, as he was marching through the streets in Mississippi on his way to the South Pacific, he and his fellow soldiers were jeered at, spit on, called nigger, and cowards. But that never colored his view of the world. He taught us to love everyone and judge, as King said, people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. So we were made aware of, however, the things that were going on around us. And so as a kid growing up, these were the images I remember seeing. And very early on, while I may have, like any kid growing up, wanted to protect the community and be a police officer or be a firefighter, these were the images that we were being shown. This is what we saw on TV. Peaceful demonstrators that were part of the civil rights movement that were being beaten by police officers, being bit by police dogs, and being hosed by firefighters. And I remember the cries of the parents of the 4 little girls who lost their lives in the South at the 16th Street Baptist Church when it was blown apart, and the blood on the dresses of the little girls as they had been there for communion. And I remember hearing their cries and seeing their parents and wondering, when is enough enough? I don't know if you know where this came from, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government laying its foundation. Anybody know where that's from? It's the Declaration of Independence. It is what led to the formation of the Black Panther Party. So we marched with Dr. King when he came here, but we heard this other voice in the distance. His name was Malcolm X. And Malcolm, when he realized that we had had enough, stood up and said, "We will have liberation by any means necessary." And that was the mantra in which the Black Panther Party was formed. The woman standing next to him, of course, is Kathleen Cleaver. You don't want to mess with Kathleen. This is the 10-point program of the Black Panther Party, and I want to just say a couple of things just to give you a little bit of fill-in in history here. Our time is limited. In 1967, Stokely Carmichael came to speak at Garfield High School. I was about to be a senior at Garfield. My political awareness was just starting to begin, really largely due to my brother Aaron, who was already at the University of Washington. He's the one who told me to go hear Stokely. And I remember hearing Stokely telling that audience there that was packed with black people and saying that the reason why black people suffered and are continuing to suffer is because they hate themselves, because they don't, in fact, love who they are. And he gave these analogies of the fact that we are brainwashed to think that everything black is bad. And he talked about, when you go to a movie and you see a Western, that the good cowboy is always in white, wears a 10-gallon white hat, and rides a white horse by the name of Trigger. And that the bad cowboy is always in dirty clothes, and his name is Black Bart. You turn on on your TV set and you watch a medieval movie, and the good knight is always dressed in white shining armor, and the bad knight is always in black armor and rides a black horse. He said it even breaks down to the food that you eat. Why is it when you go into a restaurant, he said, that you eat cake, and the angel food cake is white, and the devil's food cake is black? And I remember hearing those analogies and thinking, maybe I don't want to be white, but I want the same things that my rich white friends who lived across the red line had at that time. Maybe I wanted the same life and the same opportunities. And this was a voice that was speaking across the black community. The opportunities that we did not have that we wanted to have. The opportunities to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And so that struck a fire in us, in many people. And a few weeks later, we traveled to Oakland, California, actually to San Francisco State University. It was days after Martin Luther King had been assassinated. Larry Gossett, my brother Aaron, and myself and several others had been arrested and put in jail. I was arrested out of high school after we had tried to go to Franklin High School and help them get a BSU and get some freedom in curricula and also some respect from the school district. And so when we traveled down there, days after MLK was assassinated, a young man by the name of Bobby Hutton had been murdered by Oakland police. And at the event that evening, the speaker was none other than Bobby Seale. And Bobby Seale inspired us to want to join the Black Panther Party. And so we became the first chapter formed outside of the state of California. I just need to highlight the 10-point program because this was the foundation of everything that we did. Number one, we want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our black community. And you can go through all of those and see how relevant they are today. I'm not going to go one by one. Employment into the robbery of the capitalists of our black community, decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings, education, the end to police brutality and murder of black people, black men being exempt from military service. This was at the height of the Vietnam War when black communities were being raided, literally raided, and black men and people of color being sent off to fight in a war that had really no basis at all. And if you go through that, the last one, we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. And there's our major political objective, a United Nations supervised plebiscite to be held throughout the black colony in which only black colonial subjects will be allowed to participate for the purpose of determining the will of black people as to their national destiny. And so when you see that and you hear that, and a lot of people thought, well, why were you only talking about black people? In fact, I had a young student come up to me about 5 years ago, a black student, as I was approaching his campus to give a speech, and he greeted me at the door, and he said, "Are you the Black Panther, that's former Black Panther that's coming here to speak?" And I said, "I am." And he said, "What is the Black Panther Party?" He said, "Was that like the Black KKK?" And to be compared to the Ku Klux Klan because of the indoctrination, the miseducation, the lies that have been told about who we really are. You see, we were not a racist organization. When we say all power to the people, we talk about all power to all people. And we believe that white people should have power, brown people should have power, yellow people should have power, red people should have power, and black people should have power. All power to all people. You see, the first Rainbow Coalition was started by Fred Hampton, murdered by the Chicago police and the AFT because he dared to speak out as the Black Panther Party dared to speak out. In the summer of 1968, when we started the Black Panther Party, the very first program here in Seattle that we had was a police alert patrol where we followed police around armed to the teeth and dared them to harm or injure or murder or kill a black person in our community. Because we said, if you do attempt to, we're going to stop you. And we were armed with a law book and a shotgun. And we patrolled them until they left the community to make sure that they weren't brutalizing people within our community. I want to tell you a quick story that someone recalled to me about 6 months ago. I was at a funeral service for someone. I can't remember who it was. I was up at Mount Zion Church. And the gentleman came up to me and he said, "I want to thank you. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be alive today." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, when he was about 9 years old, he and his cousin, who was 16, were riding through the CD. And they got pulled over, and the cops said that they were robbery suspects. And they pulled them out of the car, and they slammed them onto the ground, and they had them, spread out eagle on the ground while they proceeded to tear their car apart. And while they were doing this, a black woman came out on her porch and she saw them and she said, 'You leave those black boys alone. If you don't leave them alone, I'm going to call the Black Panthers.'" And this was right on the corner, right by Brenner Brothers Bakery. Right in front of Brenner Brothers Bakery, right there on, it was called Empire Way back then. Right on Empire and Cherry, okay? And she was screaming at the police. And the brother who was telling me this story said the next thing he knew, she had gone inside the house, and 5 minutes later, myself and 2 other Panthers came screeching around the corner and jumped out of the car and put those cops straight. Told them, so what are you doing with these boys on the ground? And they admitted that while they looked like they could have been the suspects, they really weren't. So we demanded that they put their car back together, get them up off the ground, unhandcuff them, and let them go, which they did. That young man who was 9 years old, face down on the ground, was none other than Jesse Weinberry, who became a state senator here in the state of Washington. It was those kinds of things that we did in the community to protect the community and make sure that we were not being brutalized, make sure that we had, an opportunity to grow an organization that could grow our community. This is, of course, on the Capitol stairs in Olympia in 1969. That's myself with my crew out there, and the reason why we went to the Capitol to demonstrate our right to bear arms was because they were passing a law that made it illegal to carry a loaded weapon on the street because of the Black Panther Party, because we dared to defy the powers that be. And see, when you think about gun control, and I think that the use of guns has run rampant and out of control because they've allowed guns to destroy our community. But now when you talk about gun control, you know who comes out of the woodwork. And so when it was black people and they were talking about gun control, they said, oh yeah, don't let them black boys have no guns. But as soon as they made it illegal for us to carry guns, and now our NRA feel that their Second Amendment rights are at jeopardy, then everybody now is on their bandwagon, or at least everybody that's under Donald Duck's influence. I don't use that fool's name. So women were part of the Black Panther Party. First woman to lead the Black Panther Party, Elaine Brown. In fact, we just had her here for our 50th anniversary. We also had Kathleen here for our 50th anniversary in last November. They were central figures in the Black Panther Party. I like to show women in the Black Panther Party because people think that we were just a party of men. We were not. Women and men did the same things in the Black Panther Party. Went on police alert patrols, learned how to operate weapons so they could defend themselves. In 1968, J. Edgar Hoover called the Black Panther Party the #1 threat to the internal security of the United States because we had the audacity to stand up and say, enough is enough, no more. That's my brother Aaron, playing a little joke on the cops there. I don't know if you can read the caption. It says, hey, Chief, I hear you're looking for a black policeman. The slide on the right is when we went to to Rainier Beach High School to demand that the principal and the administration protect black kids from racist attacks that were happening on a daily basis, and they were not doing so. So we went out there and made sure that they were doing so. These are a list of our programs. A lot of people don't realize that to the extent of the Black Panther programs, police alert patrols, children's free breakfast, free medical clinics. I could go down that list on just a long list. So these are the programs that we were running were not just for the sake of let's give some food away or clothes away or whatever. We called them survival programs pending revolution. Because while in fact we were capturing the hearts and minds of the people through our activities, we knew that black people needed to survive this racist, decadent country. And so we had to build the foundation for people to survive. And so they were called survival programs pending revolution. So some examples of them, the Children's Free Breakfast Program. Here in Seattle, we fed 2,000 kids a week, a hot breakfast in 5 locations across the city, in 4 of the housing projects and at the Atlantic Street Center. Ike Ikeda was one of our biggest, strongest supporters. He was visited by the FBI when we went to ask Ike if we could have a breakfast program there. And the FBI said, well, these guys are violent and they're going to indoctrinate the kids. And Ike said, I'll make that determination. And he talked to us and he said, you can have the breakfast program here. Ike was a hero. Feeding the community body, serving the community body and soul. We had some of the first free food banks. You can see the happy, smiling faces on those kids and the women who are getting food for their families, how much it meant to them. Free clothing and free shoe programs. An education that exposes the true nature of this decadent society. That's part of the 10-point platform and program. We had summer liberation schools here in Seattle. In Oakland, we established the Oakland Community Learning Center, which was a certified school that was educating young youth in Oakland. Didn't matter what color you were when you came to our programs. We fed you or we clothed you or we gave you whatever we had. But these programs were set up in the black community. Growing our youth, each one teach one. The Summer Youth Institute that I mentioned, those are some of the Panther kids that were there. That's the free medical clinic that we established. The Sidney Miller Free Medical Clinic in 1970 became the Carolyn Downs Family Medical Center, which is still operating today right up the street on Yesler. We had the real version of Obamacare, not the fake one. Sickle cell anemia testing and high blood pressure screening. The Black Panther Party launched sickle cell anemia screening in the early 1970s and brought attention to the fact that this disease that affected primarily black people was not being paid attention to. And we brought such attention to it that a year or so ago, I think it was now 2 years ago, that a cure was finally announced for sickle cell anemia. We have to believe that at least the Black Panther Party had something to do about that. Fred Hampton, as I mentioned, who was murdered in Chicago. If you don't know the story of Fred Hampton, I haven't got time to tell you. I suggest that you look it up. But Fred Hampton is the one who coined the Rainbow Coalition, the phrase Rainbow Coalition. It was not Jesse Jackson. And what he said is what we need is black power for black people, white power for white people, red power for red people, yellow power for yellow people, brown power for brown people, and all power to the people. Let me hear you say it. All power to the people. Right on. So there's the original Rainbow Coalition. Those are some of the organizations that we were fighting with. AIM over here, the American Indian Movement, a Puerto Rican group called the Young Lords. They were here at our reunion on the Red Guard. We have a Japanese member of the Black Panther Party, Mike Tagawa, who is one of the original members of our party. SDS, we also had another organization of young white poor folks out of Appalachia called the Patriot Party. They were also represented at our reunion. And then, of course, the Brown Beret in the middle, along with members of the Black Panther Party. So when you think about the Black Panther Party, I want you to remember this, that yes, we carried arms to demonstrate that we had a right to defend ourselves. And yes, we faced down cops in the street. And yes, we demanded a new day. Yes, we demanded a new transition. You see, we didn't accept any federal funds for our programs. We didn't go out and beg them for no money. Everything that we had, every program that we ran, came from the strength of the community. When we needed the medical clinic, we contacted this white doctor by the name of John Green, who was out at the University of Washington, head of neurosurgery. John used to follow the demonstrators around in the huge peace rallies and peace demonstrations, 20,000 people, and they would get their heads hit by billy clubs, and Dr. Green would be at the back with a makeshift medical team patching them up. And we went over to John and we said, John, we need a free medical clinic. And he said, well, let's go smoke some hash first. So we went over his house. This is a neurosurgeon smoking hash. I figured, hell, if a neurosurgeon can smoke hash, I'm going to smoke it. All right? Sat down with John, and John said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to get a big old truck. You're going to back it up to the door at the back of the University of Washington Hospital at the designated time on the designated day, and I'll be there. So we got a big old truck, backed it up to the hospital. The door opened up, and there was John with all the medical equipment that we need. I said, damn, John, where'd you get that shit? He said, I appropriated it from the hospital. You see, they weren't using it anyway. And John knew that we could put it to good use. When you looked at the breakfast programs, we went out and we got food for the breakfast programs. We went to the stores in the neighborhood. Safeway told us no, so we shut them down. We went around to this little tiny store on the corner of 24th and Jackson called Jack's Mini Mart. Jewish cat by the name of Jack Richland. I said, Jack, we need some food for the breakfast program. You know what Jack said? He said, how much you need? I said, whatever you got, Jack. And Jack would give us fresh meat. He would give us eggs. He would give whatever he had, extra. And you know what? The community recognized that. In the next couple of years, Jack moved from Jack's Mini Mart back on 22nd and Union and bought the gas station on the corner, the Shell gas station, and opened up Jack's Super Mini Mart. That's because the community knew that he had given back to the people, to the breakfast program, and they supported him. That's where we got our stuff from. That's where we got our resources from. The resources are within the community. We need to stop begging the government for stuff. Because when you beg the government for stuff, you see what happens. Along comes Donald Duck and he pulls it all back. And that will continue to happen. If you want to organize within the community, you need to build from the grassroots up and rely on yourselves, because you have the power to make the change. All power to the people.
Thank you so much, Elmer. Well, it looks like we've filled our night with stories. So we got about 30 minutes left. So we're going to do 10 minutes for White King, and we got 2 more performances right after that. Our final speaker for the evening is a third-generation community builder and social entrepreneur. He's the chief strategist for developing Seattle's Africatown initiative and has been a co-catalyst for several ventures, including the Africatown Community Land Trust, Liberty Bank Building, Umoja Peace Center, Hack the CD, Black Dot, and Africatown Center for Education Innovation. In 2014, he was the recipient of the Center for Ethical Leadership Legacy Award. Please welcome White King Garrett.
Peace, good evening. How's everyone? All right. So I was asked to talk about the future and how I see it, and it's an honor to follow the stories that have been told. I grew up in the Central District, and what I say is the BC era. That's before crack. And slide. When I think about the future, it's about these two and what will they experience in Seattle. The Seattle I grew up in is a lot different. The Central District that I grew up in is a lot different. I did grow up in a village. I grew up with fruit trees, plum trees, blackberry bushes, apple trees, and running in different neighbors was our extended family. A lot of families had multiple houses in one block, and all the backyards were somewhat connected, but that's a different world, like I said, before crack. And that time period was forged by many of the stories that you heard before you, and there was redlining, and there were many policies that limited the growth and development and the economic mobility of the black community that was reserved to be in the Central District, but grew into a rich village. And so I think of this quote from Dr. Mindy Fullilove. And so when I talk about before crack, I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 1977. I said third generation. My grandfather came here. He was actually one of the co-founders of Liberty Bank, which was the only black bank in Washington State. My father, Omari Tahir Garrett, was founder of the African American Heritage Museum at Coleman School, and I was a part of the occupation when I was 8 years old, being in that building that now holds something. Not exactly what the vision was, but there is a cultural center there, or gallery. We still need to make a world-class cultural center to honor our time here. But when you look at Weed and Seed, and we look at the population of the community today, and we look at the population, as you heard, is up to 80% black in the Central District. When you think about this program being piloted in Seattle, a federal program in 1990, what the population of the community was and what it is now, we can see who was identified as weeds and what was identified as seeds. It's very clear. It's not, theoretical at this point. And many of my peers, were white. We had a whole generation wiped out when I say before crack, because between the actual drugs and the weed and seed and the police and the criminalization of a community, we lost a whole generation. Many of my peers' parents who were to inherit the homes and pass on the wealth, the big wealth transfer there, and many of my peers who did not, proceed in their lives, without being infected by that. And so now when we talk about community moving, it's not a community planning a move, right? It's really being displaced as refugees. Black people, African people in America were first displaced or gentrified from Africa to, the U.S. to work this land and make it the wealthiest, nation by applying our labor capital to the land that was stolen from the Indians. And my grandparents, like many other blacks, came to Seattle in the World War II era, fleeing the hostile post-slavery sharecropper society of the South. And when they came here, they met a different type of Jim Crow apartheid in the form of housing covenants and et cetera. But the black community was established in the Central District before that. William Gross bought 12 acres of land from Henry Yesler in 1882, and he began to partition off his land to make it a place where black people could settle. And his house is still just north of the YMCA over off of 24th and Denny. And so this has been home to people of African descent for over 130 years. And now we see that after the compounding issues of redlining, divestment, urban renewal, removal, highways, eminent domains, predatory crack, predatory lending, our community is not able to compete in the capital market around real estate, after all of those issues. And like I said, it's not a planned move. We're not, you don't have a urban planning committee that's saying we're going to move to Renton and we're going to reestablish our community and we're going to move to Kent. It's really kind of another forced dispersal. People are scattered like, refugees wherever you can pitch a tent or for rent or a mortgage, I guess, at this point. And so Dr. Mindy Fullilove authored a book called Root Shock, and it speaks to what the negative impact of a community being displaced in this manner is, and the Center for Disease Control has actually identified that this type of displacement has negative effects on people's health, individuals, families, and communities. And so we have a lot of support systems that don't exist anymore as people are spread out throughout the region. So I'm here to talk about the future, but I needed to talk about the kind of a little bit where we've been and where we are today. We know this bird, it's the crane, not the Seahawk, and we see them everywhere, and they're building, but who are they building for? We know it's not equitably, all communities are not growing. Seattle is growing. Seattle is booming, actually, again. But our communities have not been participating in the boom. I guess we've been getting boomed on. And this is not anecdotal. This is the numbers speak to it when you look at the income. These are, I didn't write this. This is the Seattle Times. I know y'all trust that source. You think I might be making up stuff. But you see the income. And then again, you may say, well, people are moving. This is what people do. They move up. They're economically mobile in a positive direction. So yes, they don't have home ownership in Seattle as much, but I'm sure it's increasing in the county. But we don't see that happening. So we see a negative trajectory. While Seattle is going this way, we see our community going that way, but we say this is a place of inclusiveness and equitable development and shared prosperity and social justice. We hear all these terms, but the material reality is different. And we often are seeing these eulogies being written about our community, on a pretty regular interval. And so when we looked at the Seattle 2035 plan, which speaks to the future of the city, I didn't see my sons, I didn't see the children of my peers being present in the future. We didn't see a place, where, y'all know who that is? Yeah. Queen of Hip Hop Soul, MJB, Mary J. Blige. Where else would she come but to 23rd and Jackson? Where else would the Queen of Hip Hop Soul come except to the place where soul and hip hop, really lived and was born in this particular area? We didn't see that in the future. So we came together to create our own planning for Seattle 2035, Black Seattle 2035, to, take the script and write ourselves into the future. A lot of times the black person is the first person to get killed in the movie. So we had to kind of take the script and, rewrite that and, create a future for ourselves. It's growing, so we should be growing too. I figure if our population was 10%. As the city grows, we should still be at, 10%, more people, everyone's increasing. And so as a part of that process, we created a community development framework that identified how we can partner, how we can develop our community. And at the top of that list was ownership of land, participation in the development building. There's a lot of economic opportunity connected to housing development, affordable housing development, non-affordable housing development. Affordable to some, it's not affordable to those that don't work in, high tech. And this picture is the groundbreaking on Juneteenth of 2017 of the Liberty Bank building, which is the first project which embodies these principles along the lines of mitigating the displacement of our African American community that's been here. It was a partnership between Africatown, Bird Bar Place, formerly Centerstone, formerly Central Area Motivation Program, Black Community Impact Alliance, and Capitol Hill Housing as a nonprofit developer. And the MOU was structured that was basically a community benefits agreement that included ownership for the community in a period of time, as well as participation in black contractors and prioritizing businesses that were legacy businesses in the community being able to stay or come back to the community, as well as mitigating displacement of residents. So simultaneously to that, we were working on the Midtown, 23rd and Union, to acquire that property. The family that owned it for over 75 years was selling, and 23rd and Union had been a hub of black businesses for many years, and the only way that we could see that being continued into the future is if we actually own the land. And so these are just conceptual designs that were done by the esteemed Dr. Sharon Sutton, who was a African-American woman, first architecture instructor, and she was a professor, and she was at the UW, and they ran a studio just to say, what would Afrocentric design look like? We heard about the story of this building, and it was designed to reflect the culture, the values, and the character of the Jewish community. But when we look around, we know we are people with a culture, a heritage, and lived experiences as well. What buildings do we have that reflect that and our uniqueness? And you would be challenged to find clear examples of that. And so we wanted to explore that. And last year, we were able to come to a deal when the property was sold. It was purchased by Lake Union Partners, and we had an MOU for, we formed a community land trust, Africatown Community Land Trust. We got some board members in here, shout out. And we were able to acquire 20% of the Midtown 23rd Union block to do heritage-rich, equitable development that actually honors and preserves the black community that has been here for over 130 years. And so that is, we also partner with Capitol Hill Housing to develop approximately up to 134 units of affordable housing there. We are exploring affordable home ownership, including that in the project as well, as there's a number of affordable space issues that have to be solved for us. We've been working to repurpose the Fire Station 6 as a innovation hub, honoring William Gross Center for Cultural Innovation, to connect what we know is a legacy of innovation in our community. When you talk about the jazz legacy, we talk about what Quincy Jones, not Quincy Jones, but Jimi Hendrix did with the guitar. If that's not innovation, I don't know what is. Paul Allen says he owes his life to basically Jimi Hendrix, so maybe we could get that promenade back, you know? But if you want to experience innovation in our community, where do we go? We know if our young person wants to go to the NBA, where they have a lot of options to do that, but where do they go to, to innovate? And where do we go to solve problems? Because innovation is just problem solving. And where are the pathways to the innovation and knowledge-based economy that's around us, that's grown around us from our community? And we see our community as definitely untapped brilliance that needs to be further nurtured. And so we think that's the highest and best use for this property. Currently, they're just parking meter-made vehicles there. I don't think that's bringing any joy or vibrancy to anybody's life in the Central District. And we see this as being, a hub for an epicenter of Africatown Innovation District. I think it's great that we have historic arts and cultural district, but we don't want to become amenities and just museum pieces in the community. We want to be a part of the future and creating the future, and innovation is about creating your own future, taking your destiny in your hands, addressing the problems that you face. And so it's been here, we've been here, and so we want to continue to chart a path forward. We formed a Africatown Planning and Design Committee. We have folks in the House representing that too, to actually bring together professional architects, planners, designers by profession with community members that are designers by lived experience, to work together to actually begin to design a future for our community and reimagine what would an asset-based community be for us. So often, Black communities the narrative is around deficit, a place you don't want to go. You heard about that, people being fearful, and not just here, but even Africa is described as this dark continent and famine, and so, but yet this is the birthplace of humanity and the birthplace of civilization. So how do we start from that point? And how do we leverage our own and reference our own heritage and design? We think about the first architect, Imhotep, who was an African, right, in Egypt. Yeah, Egypt is in Africa, despite what the movie showed you. And aliens didn't build the pyramids. Imhotep wasn't that bad of a guy. He wasn't a mummy monster. And we think about Benjamin Banneker, who was a planner for Washington, D.C. And so, again, just tapping and using our own history and heritage as reference points for creating our own future that is positive and inclusive, and continuing, again, to imagine what could be, expanding our minds. Many of our people came from the South to the North, and they basically got in where they fit in. Innovation, again, making a way out of no way, taking what you have and making more. That is definitely what the Black experience in America definitely has been about. And so, again, now we want to say, what if we were to actually design spaces and communities that center our well-being, right? That allow us to be our best selves, which benefits everyone at the end of the day. So just a couple short-term projects that we're working on to embody, again, these principles. This is the Midtown Center site as it is now. It's not a high-traffic location as it may have been before. There's a high-traffic location on the other corner. High drug traffic, but no weed and seed, no stings, but it's a high drug traffic. There's actually a sign that says 1-800-DRUGS, still many of my peers are living with the after effects of not being able to get rich from that economy. But we want to, in the short term, activate the Midtown Plaza as it is before it's demolished in a way that is a preview to what we envision as heritage-rich development that would center our community and bring some color and life, make it a destination for the next 6 months this summer, bring market, events, color, plants, stuff Seattle is usually good for, but it's a lot of concrete there. But we want to transform that space, and Sarah Zodia, who's in the audience, is leading up that project. Big shout out. We want to take, this, show of hands, how many people have been there in the last 30 days? Few, okay. Post office, liquor store, okay. Barbershop. We want to transform it into a space to go. We're working on that. So just to give, again, a preview of what we see as being what should be redeveloped, what the space should be after it's redeveloped. And the other project is Imagine Africatown. We're going to hold our first design weekend. Will be a series of events where we will be taking multiple sites in the community and imagining those as what if they were our, anybody know the font? What if we were to design our own real life Wakanda urban, town center, right? And so again, just to get our community more connected with the urban planning process of the future. So it's going to be held at Garfield High School and 23rd and Union. There'll be a town hall. We'll be bringing some very prominent black designers from the African diaspora and the nation into the community. There'll be a community dinner, and then there'll be a cipher, which will be, many of you may know the term charrette, where we come together and again imagine what these sites can be in the future along the design principles of recognizing and celebrating the African American or African diaspora experience. So this is what your mayor, our mayor, Seattle's mayor, has said about Africatown. So we want all of you to help make this a reality. Not only a model for the city, but for the entire nation. Seattle is a place that is priding itself on innovation, solving hard problems. We have 3 companies here that are in a space race to build condos and communities on Mars and the moon. So I think we can figure out how to help communities grow and thrive in place right here in our own backyard. And I think that's Bezos, that's Allen, and the other Elon Musk, right? So they all bringing smart people from all over the world here. So let's leverage some of that. But let's make this a reality. Let Seattle lead the nation in finding solutions for development without displacement. We can hack gentrification, we can disrupt displacement, but it'll take everyone really pushing the envelope for Seattle to not just talk about being inclusive, being diverse, or valuing these things while it's becoming less inclusive every day. So, Africatown, it's okay, you don't have to be scared. Everywhere outside of China, community of Chinese is a Chinatown. I mean, I live in a state that's named after a slave owner. So what's wrong with having a community that honors the birthplace of humanity and civilization? We have neighborhoods that are named after swindlers like Hillman City, Columbus City, genocide, come on now. It's not that far of a stretch. It's your mama, Mama Africa, the motherland, everybody in here. No place that reflects that. So thank you. And enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you so much, Joaquin. So unfortunately, we're skipping the panel, but I just wanted to say thank you to Marie Kide, who came here from Phoenix. She was recently the project manager for the Seattle chapter Black Panther Party's 50th anniversary conference. So thank you. Can we give her a round of applause for coming? Thank you so much. And for those who want to stick around for some music, if we can get the performers downstage. So our first performance tonight is by electro soul and hip hop artist, cornbread fed from the Midwest, now making money moves in the Pacific Northwest.
We're here.
With sultry vocals, catchy melodies, and real life content with influences from soul, electronic, hip hop, and trap, his pageantry of a performance is a must-see event. Catch CarLarans on stages and venues throughout Seattle, doing community activism and snatching tens up and down the West Coast with Seattle's own House of Luna Ballroom Collective. Please welcome CarLarans.
Hey, everybody. This is in remembrance of our ancestors. Sam Cooke and Marvin Gaye and Donny Hathaway and all that came before. You opened up a door because of you. A change gon' come. My name's CarLarans. I actually live right down the street, right on 15th and Fur. Actually, right down the street from Linda's, I think where Linda's dad grew up, she talked about earlier. This neighborhood means a lot to me. This is where I've been since I moved to Seattle just 3 short years ago, and it was very interesting to hear the history and how diverse this area was. I'm just going to do an original song for you. Some have said that this could be a metaphor for the mistrust of developers and gentrification in Seattle, so I will let you be the judge of that. But this song's called Smoke and Mirrors.
Just drop the act, I'm not your friend to me. And so don't come back, cause I can see it clearer right through your smoke and mirrors. Oh yeah. This hide and seek, it makes me fatigued. My heart it bleeds for your next little fling. So tell him the truth, that if he really knew you, he's just little boy blue in your game of Russian roulette. You think that you can hang with me? Just drop the act, I'm not your friend to me. And so don't come back, cause I can see it clearer right through your smoke and mirrors. You changed the rules on me. It's better to have loved and lost than never play at all. Some other life, another time, maybe I'd be content just living in your lies. Go back to him, but babe, this ain't the end. You'll crave me back again, cause it's ride or die. You think that you can hang with me? Just drop the act, I'm not your friend to me. So don't come back, cause I can see it clearer through your smoke and mirrors.
Thank you so much.
Make some noise for CarLarans.
Thank you. Please look me up on Facebook. I do a lot of activism right here in Seattle. I host a monthly series called The Beat, where I bring on fellow QT-POC or queer people of color artists on and give them a voice and a platform here in Seattle. So please come out and support if you can. And thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Eric, for the invite. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. All right, so our final performer flew up here from Los Angeles just for tonight. So he's a hip-hop MC and musician from Seattle, Washington, the son of two African music legends. He moved to Zimbabwe when he was 6 years old. Still a youth when he returned to the U.S., he is introduced to hip-hop on the streets of Seattle. Finding his passion in creating music, he progressed as an MC, soon becoming one of the most respected hip-hop artists in the Northwest. Please welcome Draze.
Test. What's up, y'all? How y'all doing? Good energy in here? Man, y'all too quiet for me, man. Woo, man. Solemn. I'm with you. I feel kind of the same way, man. It feels good to be home, man. Feel real good to be home. I love the town. Every time I come here, it feels real good. I'll probably run my mouth for a second while I guess they plug up some stuff. Beat my chest a little bit. So, all right, we get into a little bit of music, man. I'm gonna just talk for a second. Let the music go from my heart. I don't tend to prepare anything. I like to just, whenever I speak, go from the heart. I'm excited to be home. I'm gonna be honest with you, but at the same time, if I'm honest, it's always a painful experience when I come here, man. There are so many changes. It truly is disheartening. I can't even explain to you guys what it feels like. It's hard right now, in particular being a black man in America. There's like so many things being thrown at you. You can't even understand the mental, the emotional. It's strange what I'm seeing people go through. Like, this ain't even right. You know what I'm saying? Like, it ain't even right. Me and White King were just building backstage. Like, what's been done to us, is particularly in the Northwest, is crazy, right? So, I mean, as a black man, you have to constantly look and be like, well, do I choose to go to the right, right? And they want to kill me, right? Or do I go to the left and it feels like they just want me to disappear, right? And so you're like, I'm going to die, but I have to choose which route I want to die. Like, it's just not, I don't know. And so I walked through Columbia City, and it was just nuts just walking through there and being like, wow, this is nuts. There's hair salons, and I don't mind certain things, but I don't know, like, as a black man, it's really, really hard. I think African Americans in particular, gentrification affects us all, but I think it affects African Americans in particular in a completely different way just because of the story. You can never detach story. When you attach slavery and the fact that you didn't have a choice, and then you're here, and then you're forced to be in an area, and this is all you have, and then you remove me, that's everything. And then it's hard because in this generation, we preach all of these concepts and ideologies and, diversity, which really they want sameness, right? They want to get rid of you, but diversity and all these different things. But at the end of the day, what is diversity if I don't exist? And then you say it to communities, and it's like people just keep walking through the community. Nothing changes. You're just like, yo, like, is anybody even listening? Like, and I get it, everybody's not a Bible-believing person. That's okay. It's an archaic book, not to me. To me, I look in the book and it says that there's this concept. If nothing else, take the concept, and they talk about an iron, and taking an iron and placing a hot iron on a person's conscience, and it sears the conscience to the point where you're numb and you can't feel anything. It's happening right in front of you, but you can't even feel or hear what's happening to you because you're numb. And that's how I look at this generation. I'm like, yo, I'm in pain, and nobody even cares. My hope is that the music can help repair that, can help heal that. My role to society, to culture, to everything is a little bit different. I'm not a politician. I ain't running for nothing. I might run some of them off, but I ain't running for nothing. You know what I mean? And my job is to open your eyes and get you to think again, get you to love, to get back to that part of humanity that is just brother and sister and person across you and care from somebody else's perspective. I don't want to eat a pizza that has Chinese food on top of it and mix everything in one. If that's your deal, that's what's up. But for me, I do like diversity. There is something about going down to Africatown, going down to Chinatown, and seeing the differences of all these different cultures and that being beautiful and that being okay. So, I don't know. I'll stop because I could just talk and talk and talk. This first song I'm gonna do, I wrote out of what I'll say is kind of a painful moment for myself. Same thing. When you have this clashing of cultures happening, which happens based or because of gentrification, you have this clashing of cultures. And when cultures clash, I don't believe we're all the same. We're the same in value, but we're not made the same as in the way life has done us, where we've become. We're the same in value. Please believe that. Don't get it twisted. But what I mean is if I live 20 years over here and you live 20 years over here, our ideologies go in different directions. That's where culture comes, right? Culture is a socially constructed concept. And so when we look at our culture as African Americans, it's different. And when you have a clashing of culture, the dominant culture tends to step on you. And so we have found ourselves in situations where we've got a clashing of cultures. Seattle is in jeopardy of not having a black community altogether. That's how scary it is. And I mean that. I don't know very many black folks who live in Seattle. And what good is care if ain't nobody gonna do nothing about it? And I'm not just talking about affordable housing. We don't always want to be broke and living in affordable housing. I want to have money too. Anyways, I'll stop bleeding. I went out on 23rd and Union one day, and I sat out there, and it was a bubbling, popping night, something like back in the day. But this time it was a little bit different. I sat out on the corner, and I looked into the bright lights of 23rd and Union, and people were walking. It's like 9 o'clock at night, and it was crazy to me. I'm like, I used to love to have something like this, but when we was out here, it was always a problem. And as I sat there, it was bubbling, but I wasn't happy, obviously. And the pain started to kind of set into my heart. And the melody that you're listening to is the melody that started to play in my heart. And so as I sat there, I was like, I'm gonna write. And I started to write, and this is what came out. And I hope that it, touches you. They say that 23rd is booming. Man, 23rd is ruined. 23rd Psalm in my palm, and it's so confusing. The book says he makes us lie in green pastures. This can't be what he means. I'm looking for answers. Tired of flipping chapters, praying, waiting for raptures. Shout out to Y King, but where are all the pastors? Ed Murray says there's so many contributing factors, and everybody like we putting greens at the Masters. I guess it's too much irony for me. I don't judge those who smoke. Half my dudes smoke weed. It's too much irony for me. The church and the weed house separated by 2 feet. There's kids who play in this building. I don't give a damn what you believe. The mosque and the synagogue shouldn't be next to buildings like these. All this greed and this suffering and all this sacrifice, the lust of the flesh. This can't be right. 2 feet, it's not even a wingspan. Are we so gone that we can't practice a little discretion? There's nothing to think about. This is not okay. And what the hell are these politicians doing anyway? We pay taxes too. 23rd is all toe up. And then our businesses fail. I guess the hood is for sale. The enemy is faceless. And it's this system that rapes us. Empty bike lanes. I guess the hood needed a facelift. I play the hood ain't the same. And they called me tasteless, followed by the classic lines. Draze, I'm not a racist. Well, I'm so relieved you said it. It must be true, but it would really help if your actions would speak for you. My bad. It's way too much irony for me. I heard that Earls is leaving. That's why I got that Saks grieving. We was redlined in, but now we blackballed out. So they could sell green, had to write the flag on the fuck walk for ourselves. It's way too much irony for me. Ike may be kin to you, but he's no uncle to me. I gave my heart to God in that church, and I ain't preaching religion. I watch families restored and folks overcome their addictions. I walk these streets praying for crackheads and fiends like they was my own. So Ike is no uncle to me. How many brothers went to jail on them corners for moving dime bags in a week? He doing what, a couple $100 grand? Montana said we went to jail for the same thing. I guess white is right. It makes me want to sing. Isn't it ironic? Woo! Don't you think? Now we can sit around all day and talk about this Europe end. But if you shop there, then you're just as guilty as him. This is all me. No bullhorn or picket sign. One human to another asking if you would politely decline. Is it possible to be socially responsible at the same time? There's other shops on the hill. It's like a 5-minute drive. These gentrifiers are liars, as greed masters care. Painful watching my words fall on these deaf ears. And it screams with irony. Union Street hustlers have become this man's customers. And it screams with irony. And it screams with irony. And it screams with irony. The place of our ruin is a street called Union. And it screams with irony. And it screams with irony. Oh, and it screams with irony. Lord, do you hear me? I said it screams with irony. Make some noise for my guys, please. Yeah. All right. Before we rock out the last one. All right. So I always say this, right? If y'all could do me a favor, close your eyes. Let's do this real quick. Change the pace in it. Close your eyes. All right. So you and your family are in a car. You shouldn't be looking at me. Only one man should be looking at me. Amen. So you and your family are in the car, and you're driving down the street. You guys are pushing down. It's a hot, sunny day, and you are on Seward Park. Let's just pick a beach. Why not? Seward Park. You're rolling down Seward Park. You're strolling. You and the family. You got the kids in the car, the wife, the family, the husband, the boyfriend, the girlfriend, whatever your partner. You're in the car. You're strolling. You're looking for a beach because you guys want to post up and set up for the day. You and your family, you pull up to one part of the beach, you see people, there's people out there, they're having food, they're playing with beach balls, people putting suntan lotion on, you go, nah, we don't want to go here. So we pull and we drive down a couple of more blocks. And you look over and you see another pot of land and you look, nah, we don't want to go, and you keep going. And finally you stop and you see it, and there's people out there, suntan lotion, it's fun, they are having a blast. And you're like, this is it, we're about to post up and kick it for the entire day and have a good time here. Right here. Now I want you to picture that everybody on that beach is black. Do you still want to go? You don't have to answer out loud. It's in your heart. You can open your eyes. There's nothing wrong with you looking and going, I don't know if I want to be on that beach. What I ask, and I present that for us so that you can be honest with yourself on where you are. More importantly, I want you to understand that that is the reality of a black man in Seattle. Every single day, everywhere that we go, we are on that beach looking and going, it is all white. Do I want to go there? I don't have a choice, right? I ain't gonna have no beach. If I want to go to work, this is what it's gonna look like. Every single place that I go, where the culture is different, where the way they talk, the way they move. For instance, like if you ever had on your job, and I'm gonna get into the music and I'll just stop, but if you ever on your job, look at like, let's say on Thursday nights, you guys go watch Thursday night football or something, everybody's going down to the bar, and every time you go to the black guy, I'm gonna find a typical black guy named Daryl, right? Daryl, you wanna come with us? And Daryl's like, nah, I'm not gonna come, right? And you ask him next week, Daryl, you wanna come? Nah, I'm not gonna come. Daryl doesn't come very often. You know why? More than often than not, Daryl's tired of faking. He's been faking all day. He fakes all the time. But if he's gonna come to that bar, you know how Daryl's gonna come? Like this, because this is how he's comfortable. But he knows if I come like this, you're not gonna see Daryl who's working in his cubicle. You're gonna see a different Daryl. You're gonna see this guy. You're gonna see young Trayvon. And I wanna be able to be comfortable wherever I go. Y'all with me? Give me some guitars. Y'all wanna clap? Hey! Hey! I was born in the Central District, raised in the South End. I'm a homegrown kid, 12-6 living. Used to play flyers up when I lived up on Union. Push it out to Orcas and eventually the Kenyans. Didn't have much, but thankful for all we was given. It was our hood until we and C crept in. And the blocks went naked and gentrification came gone from Franklin. Robberies ain't even the same, mark my words. Gonna be white boys all on the team. I don't reminisce when I drive through this hood, I feel pain. I ain't proud of these new developments, I feel shame. I ain't trying to preach at these young brothers, just spit game. Kids the new South End, and the South End's a CD, and the CD is just a thing of the past. I remember Sammy's Burgers, soul food down in Helen's. Holly Hill back when Deuce 8 was full of felons. Now the streets is naked. Yeah, they claim it, but nobody bangs it. My man called me from the joint, I said this thing is changing. He said, young homie, what you mean? I said, I can't explain it. They moving us around like an experiment. The CD ain't the same, South End ain't the same. All around the world I see the same thing. Hurting brothers like cattle, I swear it's so strange. Picket signs don't change minds, they laughing at our pain. Brooklyn ain't the same, Harlem ain't the same. All around the world I see the same thing. Trump in the White House, so ain't nothing changed. Playing checkers with our lives. Okay, I get it. Supposed to be the melting pot. Am I wrong for wanting to live around my own? Loitering in the park. Brown bag sipping, slap boxing, dice cane, fried chicken from Richlands. Drive by tooting my horn. What up, pimpin'? This was the town in 95. Good living. Sewer Park was popping, the Black Fest, the Soul Fest. Rose from these Zales, men, them things was so fresh. Used to own our homes, now we're all renters. Got brothers moving south like birds for the winter. They asked my mama to sell her house, she said no. Then we had to shake when them property taxes rose. I know you say you ain't the ones in them white sheets, but these suits and ties are similar to me. Don't try to paint me like a black man who's angry. If you get my community, it's hard to build a legacy. Now I can ride the troops, but I just deal with it. I see through you greed, power, and privilege. Yo, I can ride the troops, but I just deal with it. I see through you greed, power. Let's go, the CD ain't the same, South End ain't the same. All around the world I see the same thing. Hurting brothers like cattle, I swear it's so strange. Picket signs don't change minds, they laughing at our pain. Brooklyn ain't the same, Harlem ain't the same. All around the world I see the same thing. Black men in the White House and ain't nothing changed. Playing checkers with our lives, but I'm seeing through the gang. Y'all with me? I'm seeing through the gang. I do it for the South End, I do it for the Central. I do it for the one who blow trees to ease their mental. I do it for the hustlers, I do it for the grimy. I do it for the young knuckleheads coming up behind me. I do it for the church, hell I do it for the sinners. My prayer is that one day that we'll all be repenters. I do it for the love, hell I do it for the culture. Never for the labels, cause they blood-sucking vultures. I do it for the cash, I gotta pay my bills. For Nana and the mama, man, my family life is real. I do it for the whoo. I love how that feels when they play that hit back like that new Draze is ill. I do it for Zimbabwe, yup, them my people. I spit that fly talk, but I ain't really on no ego. No disrespect to Pops, but I do it for my mama. Enough said, just know I do it. Hey, the CD ain't the same,
south and ain't the same. All around the world I see the same thing. Hurt brothers like cattle, I swear it's so strange. Picket signs don't change minds, they laughing at our pain. Brooklyn ain't the same, I'm not the same. All around the world I see the same thing. Black man in the White House and ain't nothing changed. Playing checkers with our lives, but I'm seeing through the gang. Hey, I'm seeing through the gang. Hey, peace, y'all, Draze. Love.
Big thanks to Draze. Thank you so much. Thank you, CarLarans. Thank you, White King. Thank you, Elmer. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Annie. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for staying, and thank you, Town Hall, for hosting, and Langston. Thank you so much.